That is the ugly part, which my friend Olivier Crasson referred to. Now, solutions, that's where we need to pass on. Education, I just moved back to what Mr. Khalid, my predecessor on this podium, who has said the education, that is absolutely necessary. But combined with education, legislation is a very important element. I'm proud, I've listened yesterday to His Excellency, the Minister of Environment. There is a lot which is being planned in the UAE. I have seen recently a draft of proposal of the Ministry of Environment, how waste and solid waste, wastewater and others should be dealt with in the UAE. And I'm sure not before a long time, all these plans will be put into practice, and I'm sure the UAE, in their usual way, once they put their mind to solving a problem, they will solve it in a very proper manner. Now, the infrastructure, treatment, and production needed. We have to roll out recyclable collection from households, including satellite recycling drop-off centers. We have to build all the necessary treatment system to handle the wastewater safely. We have to invest, and this is really something which we have to face. We have to invest heavily. I'm not so sure the municipalities are able to handle this on their own. I think we have to turn again, we look at the Sharjah model, and we look at what has been done Abu Dhabi also model. We have to turn to the private sector for help and expertise, and you'll find that the private sector is more than happy to take their role in advancing the rising up to the challenge. Now, any problem is not solved purely by investments and by good wishes. Unless there is a system of real measurement, unless there is somebody, an independent authority, who judges what is going on and gives you marks for what you're doing, we'll get nowhere. So unless measurement is a very important part of the equation, where you can measure yourselves against benchmarks of official authorities, also benchmarks against other people who are doing the same thing, so you will know how successful you are, and you have a role model to follow. Obviously, as a private sector representative and a believer, a firm believer in the private sector, I obviously always push and support that services should be given to people who are specialists in them, and give the government role to controlling the system. The government should be able to judge what has been happening and to correct and fine the people who don't do their job correctly. So obviously, I'm advocating, and we always do, what we call the PPP, which is public-private partnership, and eventually, once this has been going on for some years, it can eventually be transferred to municipalities where once it has been done for 20 or 30 years, then obviously this company can safely move back into public ownership. I hope I have given you something to think about. Obviously, it's not my specialist subject, although I think I know everything in the world, but obviously waste is not my really background. But I certainly have a lot of people which I can consult, and my group, among all the other private sector operators in the country, are here to help, and we are prepared to have discussions with anybody who wants to talk to us about this particular thing. Thank you very much for listening to me. I've only seen the presentation 10 minutes before I came on board, so if I was sounded a bit hesitant, please do forgive me, and I'm still wait for some questions. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Dr. Ghassan. And we can open the floor for 2-3 questions and rush for 5 minutes, please. Okay, okay. One question, it's okay, no problem. Please.
مرحبا دكتور بسام، السؤال اللي بدي اطرحه بس مشان موضوع النفايات الصلبة. هل مطلوب وضع مواصفات قياسية للمواد المستوردة بحيث انه ما تنتشر محلات بيع درهم ودرهمين، هي الشغلات الرخيصة واللي ممكن تتلف بسرعة وتسبب مشاكل مستقبلية بموضوع النفايات الصلبة؟ هذا السؤال رقم 1. السؤال الثاني، كمل. السؤال الثاني انه تكلمت حضرتك انه نحن هون بالامارات مستهلكين عن استهلاك عالي بالمياه. هل هذا الشيء يعطي انطباع انه لازم نربط مواضيع فواتير الصرف الصحي بكمية استهلاك المياه، ولا موضوعين مختلفين مستقلين؟ شكرا.
ما سمعت سؤالك الأولي منيح، بس خليني بلش بالثاني لأنه حكيت عن you're talking about a subject which is very dear to my heart. We cannot continue using water the way we are doing it in the UAE. Is just not sustainable. There has to be some supply demand management, and the demand management we have not been really very successful in doing. It is just not on. You cannot do that. And I think one of the main problems where we have is we are not paying for our water the true cost of the water. And as long as you have this subsidy, this built-in subsidy in the system, we're always going to suffer. The built-in subsidy is in several stages. It's in the energy, which is a big component of the cost of the water, and it is in paying for the true cost of the water. So we need to do something about that. That's one thing. The sewage treatment after the water has been used is one aspect, but there is a great aspect which we talked about yesterday and we don't need to repeat, is the water reuse. Water reuse must be part of our daily lives. We must push on for water reuse. It's scandalous that in the UAE we should have the highest percentage of water reuse in the world, considering what we pay for. It cost us to produce this water, and we are not there. I did not hear your first question correctly, but what I understood. Okay, where perhaps we can have time to really do this.
السؤال الأول إنه في صناعات هي صناعات تتلف بسرعة، فهل مطلوب إنه وضع قوانين ضمن الدولة بحيث إنه تكون مواصفات قياسية للمواد المستوردة؟
بالطبع هناك there is still a lot to go on the legislation side. I think the Ministry of Environment is very aware of what's going on, and they are certainly pushing for this. But I'm more than happy to discuss with you in the break because I think time is closing on us. Thank you very much, guys.
Thank you.
Thank you.
As we are running out of our time, so we will start continuing with the panelists. I will leave my position now to my colleagues Hamed Al-Mulla to chair this session. Thank you very much, and Hamed can continue, please.
Thank you, Dr. Mohammed, for backing us up. Now we have all of our speakers here, so we will continue our session. Our next speech is about the speaker is Mr. Neil Bennett. He is the head of waste to energy section. He's from UK. Mr. Neil his paper will review some of the new waste to energy infrastructure that has been built and commissioned In the UK, Mr. Neil, yeah, you have 20 minutes, so please start.
Good morning, everyone. Thank you very much to the municipality for inviting me to speak today. Sorry we were a little delayed. Okay, today I'm going to give you a quick insight into how much has changed in the UK waste management sector, the factors that have helped us make that change, helped us make that transition, and a quick look at some of the common solutions which have been delivered. So the UK is a country which is blessed with geology well suited to landfill. Landfill has been the predominant waste management method of disposal for many, many years, but it's not sustainable, and it's not an environmentally suitable method for treatment. And I'll come on to some of the legislation and policy drivers which will help change that. But this graph, the top line, the dark, dirty brown section, shows the reduction in landfill over the last 6 years, a reduction of 20 million tonnes. To put that into some context, in 2005 in the UK there were some 2,000 landfills operating and receiving waste, and today it's less than 500. During the same period, there's been lots of effort to increase household waste recycling, and the growth over that period has been some 3.2 million tonnes, that's recycling and recovery to energy. And we'll have a look as we go forward at some of the things that have helped achieve that. So just as a very quick overview, because it's quite a well-populated area in the UK for legislation, a quick overview of the push and pull factors which have helped us achieve those reductions in landfill and increases in recovery. We're a member of the European Union, and there's a piece of legislation which has been around for some 20 years now, which is the Landfill Directive, obligating all member states to reduce their volume to landfill against the benchmark of 1995 levels by 35% by 2020. To put that into context for the UK, that's a reduction to 9.8 million tonnes. And if you forgot what it looked like on the graph earlier, we're currently around about 23 million tonnes, so there's still a good way to go. Importantly, though, the EU Landfill Directive is only applicable to municipal waste or household waste. We also have recently signed up a Renewable Energy Directive, a mandatory target to make 15% of our energy from renewable sources by 2020. One of perhaps the most successful pieces of policy legislation in the UK has been the landfill tax. Because of that abundant supply of landfill in the UK, it was by far the cheapest method of disposal. So government needed to do something to bridge the gap between the cost of landfill and the alternative cost of better waste hierarchy options, such as conversion to energy. And they've done this by taxing every tonne of waste which goes into landfill. When it was introduced in 1997, that was a cost of £7 per tonne, and today it's £64 a tonne. And the legislation has already passed through Parliament to ensure it increases to £80 per tonne by April 2014. Beyond that, there's a commitment across all political parties that it won't fall below £80 per tonne, and it's industry speculation that it will grow more steadily to about £100 per tonne by around 2018. Furthermore, there's a requirement for large companies listed on the FTSE or the London Stock Exchange, and that have to, in their annual report and accounts, declare corporate sustainability reports. This exposes their environmental performance to investors and consumers, and has helped raise awareness of environmental issues, and particularly waste. And some notable large retailers such as Tesco and Walmart in the UK and Sainsbury's have imposed upon themselves, without any external regulation, the idea of a landfill ban. On the pool side, we have some subsidies. So for all renewable energy, there's a renewable obligation certificate issued for each 1 megawatt hour of renewable energy generated. That certificate has a current tradable value of £47 per megawatt hour. That's the minimum value. Some of the technologies which are deployed to generate renewable energy have double subsidy value, for example, offshore wind, where the government recognised that there's an extra cost to deploying those technologies. In the waste sector, we have advanced thermal treatment, which gets 2 ROCs, or anaerobic digestion, which gets 2 ROCs. We also have, for the first time ever in the world, last year, a renewable heat incentive was introduced. The current values are there. This is in its infancy, but it's going to become more important in the waste to energy sector as we generate a lot of heat with our energy in the UK. There's been a good deal of investment by government in household recycling methods as well, particularly at the curbside, to allow for segregation of waste at source by householders, which has helped increase the amount of waste which is taken out of the system in the first place and has created value by being reprocessed into other products. And in the period approximately 2000 to 2010, the UK Private Finance Initiative invested £2 billion into around 32 new waste-to-energy projects in the UK. Not all of those are operational. Some of them are still in the final stages of financial close. Some of them are still under construction, but they're all taken into account in this presentation. So let's have a look at the contrast between household waste and commercial and industrial waste in the UK. Because of the legislative attention to household waste, there's an awful lot more measurement and data on household waste in the UK. It's really quite accurate and well reported. It has this direct legislation and mandatory targets that I've mentioned earlier. It has the fiscal driver of the landfill tax payment, and it's generated a good performance that from 2005 we were looking at around 30 million tonnes of household waste, 30% recycling, and last figures, 2011, down to 26 million tonnes and just increased to 42% recycling. It's fair to say that a lot of the easy wins in that sector have already been taken. Those are predominantly garden waste to composting, some separate food waste collection to anaerobic digestion, separate collections of metals, of papers and magazines and of card. Plastics recycling and segregation at source is still relatively immature in the UK, but it's growing rapidly. So from here on in, to reach the target by 2020 of 50% recycling is going to be a lot slower, a lot more costly to get those incremental improvements in the recycling rate. Commercial and industrial waste, by contrast, has no direct legislation and no mandatory targets. However, the landfill tax still applies equally there, so the financial incentive is just as large. The data collection on commercial and industrial waste is far less accurate, far more random in fact, and a nightmare for us in the industry to keep track of. But best available information in 2003 was some 68 million tonnes and 42% recycling, and latest information in 2009 suggests just under 50 million tonnes and 52% recycling. Let's have a look at some of the common solutions that are delivered. Anaerobic digestion is an ideal solution for treating the organic content of waste, and there's a very large part of our waste stream which is organic. Is ideally suited for segregated household kitchen food waste, waste from food manufacture, or waste from supermarket retail, food retailers. The process could be described as the industrial version of a stomach, where the organic waste goes into the vessel. The vessel includes a microbial solution which helps break down the organic matter and generate a biogas, a methane, which can be separately siphoned off and turned into electricity and heat in a combined heat and power gas engine. The byproduct is a fertilizer or a compost material which has great use in agriculture. Here's just a different photo giving you a cross-section of the process. In 2005 we only had 2 waste-fed anaerobic digestion plants in the UK, and due to the stimulus that we've already talked about, we've now got 44. We've got approximately another 72 plants in various stages of construction or planning. Put that into contrast with, for example, one of our European neighbours. In Germany, there's just under 3,000 anaerobic digestion plants working. So we've still got a long way to go and a long way to grow. But the total capacity that we've got today is 3.7 million tons of feedstock input, generating some 54 megawatts of electrical energy. There's one project in Didcot near Oxfordshire which is actually just cleaning up the biogas and directly injecting it into the gas grid for use in residential heating and industrial processes. Often these plants are co-located on farms, and agricultural waste is processed within the same vessels. Another technology which has proven very popular in the UK is generically called MBT, which stands for Mechanical Biological Treatment. Typically, mechanical biological treatment is a number of technologies thrust into one process. Usually they take the form of a materials recycling facility at the front end to segregate values such as cardboard, plastics, metals and glass, followed by a process to separate out the organic fraction and sometimes compost it within a large hall with forced air pushed up through the ground in lines and holes in the concrete floor. And then that organic material is often pulped into a solution and put into an anaerobic digestion plant to create biogas and create energy. The residual waste, which is some 40 to 60%, depending upon the combination of technologies used, is made into a refuse-derived fuel. This fuel has a typical particle size of 6 to 100 millimeters. It goes through a shredder, makes it easier to transport to a thermal treatment facility off-site. Typically, that fuel has a calorific value of about double the amount of incoming waste. So typically, household waste in the UK is 8.5 to 9 megajoules per kilogram. After this MBT treatment, you're looking at 15 to 18. Here's an example of a materials recycling centre using MBT technology. It's being built for West Sussex Local Authority near Gatwick Airport in London. It's one of the largest in the country, some 300,000 tonnes of inputs. It's going to produce around 130,000 tonnes of refuse-derived fuel for conversion in an energy treatment facility which hasn't yet been built. In the interim, that material is being exported to Europe, where there's some spare capacity in an incineration plant. This is a project that my company MW are delivering on behalf of Biffa and Waste Sussex. Biffa is a UK waste management contractor. It's a value of around £100 million, and we're about 3/4 of the way through completing that project. Some shots of the process building. This is the materials recycling equipment being put at the front end of the process. And here we have the pulping machines which take the organic fraction, reduce it to a pulp to pass on to the anaerobic digestion centre. That's perhaps one of the waste-to-energy technologies you'll be most familiar with is incineration. And incineration is probably the most well-established form of energy recovery for waste around the world. There's many, many reference plants. It's just a typical cross-section, and I'll see if I can make a pointer here. Bear with me. So the waste arrives on refuse collection vehicles and is discharged into a large pit area here where this grab crane will load it into the furnace, where it's applied to a flame and incinerated and creates the steam in this boiler section here, and that steam and heat is converted into energy around here. There's a byproduct of bottom ash which is taken out there, and the flue gas and waste gases are treated in this baghouse section here before being emitted through a stack. A recent example of such a plant in London is on the banks of the Thames in southeast London in Bexley, commissioned for Corey Environmental, a company I used to work for. It's a plant called the Riverside plant. It took something in the order of 15 years to plan and develop and get consent for. It's the largest in the UK, and it receives its waste from central London. That waste is loaded onto shipping containers and placed onto barges where tugs pull it up the Thames to arrive at the jetty you can see at the top picture there to be loaded into this plant. That takes something like 115,000 lorry movements a year off of the streets of central London, which, if you've ever been, you can imagine is much improved for the lack of that congestion. It has a capacity of some 670,000 tonnes in total, the majority of which is delivered by river, which will generate a 66 megawatt electrical export. As you can see there, it's not cheap. It's a little bit more expensive than your average because there was a large investment in the jetty facility. Taking a slightly different scale, nearer the smaller end of the scale, the port of Southampton on the South England coast, a plant that was designed and delivered by Veolia, a French waste management contractor on behalf of Hampshire County Council. 165,000 tonne capacity, around about 14 megawatts of electrical export, and a really quite unique design, a circular design and a dome, which looks very attractive and is quite a landmark. It can be seen from quite a long way away. Perhaps one of the most interesting up-and-coming and emerging technologies for the sector is gasification. It's funny sometimes to talk about gasification as an emerging technology because it was used to produce coal and power from coal and some fuel from as far back as the 1880s, but its application to large-scale waste processes is relatively new, and there's not very many reference plants around the world, so funders and banks consider it to have a higher technological risk, which has halted its development full scale. However, UK government in particular and others recognise that it has a good role to play and are supporting it with double subsidy, those renewable obligation certificates we talked about earlier. Gasification is better suited for smaller scale projects than conventional incineration. A typical range would be in the order of 80,000 to 120,000 tonnes per annum, and it requires solid recovered fuel, a process fuel, rather than waste as it's delivered from the household. The process thermally decomposes the carbon in the waste to create a synthetic gas, and the gas is then burned in a conventional gas engine. It's a cleaner process than conventional incineration. It manages to capture a lot more of the energy value, so it's slightly more efficient as well. So what about the progress so far in the UK? Well, since 2005, we had only 2.8 million tonnes of waste to energy capacity, and we've grown that now to 4.3 million tonnes. That's generating some 6,500 gigawatt hours per year from waste, which is equivalent to 1.5% of the total energy production in the UK. It's 25% of the total renewable energy production in the UK, so it's a significant sector. And it's reduced its greenhouse gas emissions dramatically since the days where we were having those 2,000 landfills, which were major contributors to greenhouse gas. And it's a valuable sector as well. It's good business, 11 billion a year turnover. We've still got a way to go though. The total amount of residual waste that needs treating is represented in this column here. The amount that's either operational or under construction of non-landfill capacity is in this brown area here. We've got that much more already consented, which will hopefully, once financing is in place, be delivered soon. And that last top part there is the amount that's in the system for planning. So we've still got some extra growth, but we've made a good start. What's the challenge for Ajman? Well, the rate of economic and population growth in the Emirate is really driving up waste arisings. As this graph illustrates, the top line in red being population for the last few years, and you can see the more steeply rising curve. I couldn't make it do a curve actually, sort of jagged line, which is representing the increase in household waste arisings. And just as a little bit of an indication of where Ajman sits in relation to the UK, per person, it's still quite a lot less kilograms of waste per year. And as economic growth develops, you can expect Ajman to get nearer to where the UK waste arising per head is. So that curve is going to rise more steeply. But this isn't a problem, this is an opportunity. Waste is a great resource to turn into real value, both energy and further upstream from that, the value of taking out recyclable products and selling them to end-user markets. And we hope to touch upon how we go about delivering that at the workshop tomorrow for those that are interested. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Mr. Neil. We will have the questions after the last speech at the end of the session. Our next speaker is